afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Cyberwarfare and Digital Conflict panel. We're going to do a little bit change up here. I'm going to ask retired General Wayne Eyre, the former Chief of Defense Staff, to come up and just try to set the scene from a strategic perspective. Having been the Chief of Defense Staff and having been the Commander of the Army, he understands the pan-domain environment, full spectrum operations, and the role and the criticality of cyber operations. So with that, I'm going to ask General Eyre to come up and say a few words.
Hey, thanks, Dan. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay, I was worried we're under a cyber attack. But no, it's a pleasure to be here. C'est un grand plaisir pour moi d'être ici parmi vous pour partager mes pensées. Dan, thank you for the invitation. Hey, I'm not going to talk about ones and zeros. I'm going to talk about the context of the threat and how cyber warfare fits in the overall concept of modern warfare. But to do that, I think it's important that we understand the context of the threat environment, the security environment that we are in, because it is probably the most complex that we have faced in human history. And we've faced complex challenges before throughout the long arc of human history, but never before have we had the confluence of what I like to call the four security stressors all coming together at the same time. The first one is geopolitical. Yeah, we're in the process right now of a geopolitical reordering. That rules-based international order that came in the aftermath of the Second World War, well, the norms and expectations that were set, we're drifting away from those, back to an era of might makes right, of regional spheres of influence, and adversaries standing up against that norm to remake the world order in their own image. That's coupled against the second stressor, which is climate change, which is the backdrop for all geopolitical interactions as we face some incredible security challenges there. Thirdly is an unprecedented acceleration in technological change, faster than at any other time in human history. And then finally, affected by the top three is the last one, which is societal change. So we take a look here in Canada. You know, we've probably had more change in our society in the last 10 years, in the last decade, than we've seen in the last 50 years combined. So the norms, the expectations, the demographics are rapidly changing, greatly affected by technology, because the way that we absorb information is changing as well. So in this period of changing order, where the permutations and combinations of these threats all coming together means that the future is very unstable, very uncertain. And if we take a look at changing world orders throughout history, those transition periods are rife with instability, rife with opportunity for miscalculation. So lots of bad things can happen during those times. We are facing adversaries that are increasingly aligned with a common aim of undermining our own system of democratic governance. Not to overthrow our systems, but to protect themselves at home. Because the biggest thing a dictator fears is the very powerful human emotion of hope. And if they can show that democracy is not working, that secures their own regime survival at home. So the adversaries we face are increasingly integrated. We saw that on the 3rd of September on the so-called Victory Day parade in Beijing, where adversaries are working together, they are sharing lessons, and they're increasingly aligned in their worldview. They also have a very different strategic culture than we do. You know, in the West, we view war as binary. You're either at war or you're at peace. For them, it's a continuum, and they look to achieve their national objectives without fighting. Where possible, fighting where necessary, and integrating all elements of national power: diplomacy, information, military, economic, law enforcement, intelligence, and that list goes on. They are much better joined up than we in the West are, and this is a shortfall for us. Clausewitz said that the nature of war is immutable. It doesn't change. It's a contest of human will. The character of it changes rapidly, but the fundamentals of it do not change. And that human will, given the extraterritorial nature of the internet, they're able to affect that human will and drive wedges in natural fissures in our societies. And so this is the future of many aspects of warfare. Cyber warfare in particular is not a panacea. It is used in conjunction with other aspects of warfare, other elements of national power. It's used to launch attacks. It's used to spy. It's used to create influence. It's used to create narratives, and it's quite useful. Attribution is difficult, and that really blurs the line between war and peace. If you can't label who launched an attack, it's very difficult to take action. But it's got to be used in other domains, and we've got to view this, the integration, as a continuum of history. If we go back several hundred years, we saw the integration of combined arms warfare with infantry, with artillery, with cavalry being used together to create dilemmas on the enemy. You fast forward that to the 20th century, and we saw the advent of joint warfare, where you had land, maritime, and air forces working together. You bring that forward to the 21st century now, and we have pan-domain warfare, where we add the new domains of space, of cyber, and other government departments, all working together. And so it becomes an integration problem. So when I was the Chief of Defense Staff and we would conduct cyber operations, it would generally be in the context of what else? What other elements of national power, what other domains are being used? Is it in support of a maritime operation or an air operation? And so that integration was absolutely critical. And wielding those together is the art of command in the 21st century. Art of command in the warfare that we are facing or may face in the future. So at the strategic level, as one of the pieces of that pan-domain puzzle, my expectations as a strategic commander, as I would turn to our cyber commander, would be to do a number of things. First and foremost is to protect ourselves. We need to protect our networks so we've got assured command and control. And that's not just at the national level, that's also for our deployed task forces as well. If you can't talk, if you can't communicate, it's very difficult to command and control your forces. Secondly is to deter our adversaries. Having that known capability to punish or to provide attribution to their actions. And this begs the question, what does deterrence in cyberspace look like? And I think we're still wrestling with that one. A third task was to collect vital intelligence, to understand what the adversaries are doing, both in the physical world and in the virtual world. Where are they positioning themselves on our networks so that we can better respond? What potential do they have to attack our networks? It's all about minimizing surprise. Hey, surprise is going to happen. Surprise is part of the nature of war, but if we can minimize that and develop the resilience to be able to absorb that surprise and still react, that's a key task. Fourthly was to be prepared for offensive cyber actions. And understanding that some of the tools that you would use in offensive cyber actions are single shots. You can use it once, and that's it. So we had to be very judicious as to when we expose these tools. And related to that is the fifth one. Continue to develop and evolve capabilities and positioning on adversarial networks. That force development, extremely important, because going back to that changing nature of war and the technological acceleration, it's always changing, and we need to be agile enough to stay on top of that. So I'm very happy within the Canadian Armed Forces that last year we stood up the Canadian Armed Forces Cyber Command to bring all of our capabilities under one roof. to better use the cyber tools in that pan-domain, that integrated fight. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, sir, for setting the scene and understanding kind of the environment at the strategic level. The first question we're going to have today is over to Major General Dave Yarker. As mentioned, Canadian Cyber Command has only been stood up now for just over a year. And of course, that involved a lot of work at the front end of the process. But now we've had a year of test driving this. And I'd ask General Yarker to tell us what that experience has been like and what does the future hold?
Sure. So I guess I'll start with sort of what a cyber command is and then what this one has been doing. So obviously we work quite closely with a lot of our allies, and I will tell you that I'm not sure I've seen two nations actually arrive at exactly the same mix of capabilities inside a cyber command as others. Inside Canada, the capabilities that Cyber Command is responsible for is offensive cyber, defensive cyber, signals intelligence, and joint electronic warfare. And across those four warfare domains, Cyber Command is responsible for everything from conceiving what the future might look like, to building what the current capabilities are needed, to using those capabilities in order to deliver effects on behalf of the government of Canada. Across those four capabilities, Canada has long had actually some fairly deep expertise in actually all of those four domains. The stand-up of Cyber Command was really all about solving not so much a cyber defense problem, but as General Eyre indicated, solving a strategic and operational integration problem. It was about bringing the effects for capabilities that we had to bear into the right kind of fights at the right kind of time. So what have we been doing? Okay, if you're paying attention to what those four domains are, there's a few of them that are really difficult to talk about in open fora like this. So let me just say something I've said before, and that is I genuinely believe that every Canadian should be extremely proud of what their signals intelligence and their offensive cyber operators are doing across the globe. Canada has some real world-class capability that are doing the right things extraordinarily well, and I won't be able to take any questions as to what that really means. Cyber defense is usually where we spend a little bit more time talking about what we're doing, and in cyber defense, we really focus on two different kinds of operations. The first is we're responsible to defend the computer networks and the cyber capabilities of the Canadian Armed Forces, and we do that. Those in the room would be very familiar with the tools we use to do that. We have a security operations center. We don't call it that. We call it a network operations center, just to confuse you and me, I think. But we do that job very similarly to the way it's done elsewhere. Why? Because in the end, our computer networks are very similar to the networks that are used elsewhere. We just may face different kinds of threats, and the adversaries might be just a little bit more interested in some areas than others. And then the other area that, quite frankly, is relatively new in Canada, and Cyber Command has proven particularly effective at being able to maximize our impact, and those are the deployed cyber defense operations, where we work with partners like Latvia, like Lithuania, Estonia, Japan. There's a really long list of partners that we're working with. But the bottom line is what we are looking to do is improve the cybersecurity, frankly, of our partners and allies so that we all have a greater degree of cybersecurity and we can deliver effects against the adversaries that we are most concerned about. So Dan, I could go in extensive length, but I'll probably leave it there for opening comments.
Thanks, sir. And look, I'll transition over to the Belgian experience because they've a little bit ahead of us, but had some of the similar experiences. So I'd like to ask Gunther to talk a little bit about what that experience has been like through a Belgian lens and share some of that with us today.
So thank you very much. Most of the things that have already been mentioned, I'm not going to repeat them because they're also have some value to the Belgian experience. So I just want to add to everything that's been said, is that, so although in 2015 we already had units dealing with cyber issues put in place, of which, by the way, the Beruiker, one of the previous speakers, was in charge. It was only in 21 when we started to investigate the lay of the land, to visit our member states, allies, to see how they were doing things in order to have the best practices. And from there on, we made some choices. And so we decided to put the 3 layers of cyberspace, which is the physical one, the virtual one, the cognitive one, into one unit, which allows us a comprehensive approach to hybrid threats, which we are all confronted with nowadays. That was a strategic choice, and it came back to one of the remarks that every cyber command amongst the allies is constructed in a different way. We went for the comprehensive, complete way, and we did it in 2 steps. So first step was to put all the existing capabilities into one unit, which was called Cyber Command, and still is. And now we put in place a Cyber Force, which is an extension. So Cyber Command, which will grow into the other forces, and that will be the Cyber Force. Now, the expectations are high because we need to grow every day. And so to grow, you need to invest, you need to find the required skill set, and you have to establish the required partnerships. And let me tell you, it's a daily struggle. Because we belong to an entity, an organization which is called Belgian Defense, which is risk-averse, resistant to change, and put procedures in place during the long period of the perceived peace, which is not helping, which is not permissive for something as innovative and as cyberspace is today, and disruptive. So it's every day we have to find ways how to make the investment, because the ways how it has been put in place right now, it just doesn't work. Same with skill sets. There are not sufficient military available with the required skill set. There are not sufficient civilians on the market to fill in the gaps. The procedures for recruitment in the Belgian military, it's excruciating painful. So there is no short-term solution. That's why we decided to go for the long-term solution. That's why we do a reach out to the youth to explain to them how important it is to pick up studies in the field of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Although I must say, it's not STEM, it's STEAM. We cannot forget the A of arts, because it's a very important part in our education. So then hopefully within 5 to 8 years, we'll have sufficient workforce available to recruit. But for the short-term solution, we need to go and look for partnerships. Because with the increasing digitalization of society, not only, but also from the military forces, and the new weapon systems who are coming, which is all interconnected, which is increasingly expanding the attack surface to our opponents, and at the same time, the technology evolution, which is exponential, and which is for which whatever one entity cannot deal with this technology evolution by itself. So we need partners to work together, to share responsibility, to share investments, and together to be strong. So that's the choices we make until now with the stand-up Cyber Command, Cyber Force.
Thanks, Gunther. Look, now we need to transition a bit of a conversation. The future fight is going to take place on civilian-owned infrastructure. And people forget that sometimes. And then the question is what does that mean for private industry? What does that mean for the companies that are out there, or the governments out there that actually own that physical infrastructure? So I'm over to Derek Dobson from IBM Defense to talk a little bit about what this means and the challenges that it presents for nation-state actors to operate on that infrastructure. Derek.
Thanks very much, Dan. I think it's an interesting point to make that segue across, just as you were talking about partnerships there, Gunther. The uncomfortable truth that just is a fact is that the key terrain in the future fight is likely to be controlled and held by civilian infrastructure providers, not the armed forces. And then you have to consider, what does that mean then at the strategic level and at the warfighting level, the operational and tactical one. If you think at that conceptual level, there's a couple of pieces that present conundrums, or certainly thought pieces immediately. If you think General Air referred to the instruments of national power, diplomacy, information, military power, and economic might. Traditionally, conflicts were fought actually usually about access to or control of the global commons. They're usually the seaways in which you conduct trade, or the airways, etc., and how your economic power is exercised around the world. Well, actually, it's largely exercised through the internet these days, and the internet runs on industries, infrastructure. Its infrastructure, its platforms, and its software. And so that's interesting itself. And then that information domain is obviously through the internet controlled by civilian infrastructure or technology firms in its own right. And think about the scale of that. We're talking about an industry which supports thousands of hyperscale data centers, millions of kilometers of fiber, tens of thousands of low Earth orbit satellites, and actually billions of IoT-enabled devices and OT endpoints. All of that needs to be supported and defended. Why should we care about that, or why should that be of impact to governments and to the military? Well, actually, the Ukraine example was a perfect one. Two states come into conflict. You see at the diplomatic level, sanctions put in place, etc. But the technology firms have to look at both sides of an argument and think, okay, I will definitely support all of the measures that NATO or the Western countries or the rest of the world is putting in place, but I am probably not going to limit my support to the operations, to the OS for healthcare and hospitals on the opponent's side in Russia. I'm probably not going to limit the amount of support to the food production systems. So that comes into the factor of when you're thinking about industry. And then at the warfighting level, and I'll cover on this just very quickly to think about that, in the transitional and offensive phases, which are only roughly touched upon for very good reasons, if you think about how battle space management works itself, then we're used to coordinating effects in terms of joint fires in the kinetic sense, information operations and cyber operations, thinking about how those effects will be brought into space in kill boxes, or, which sound dreadful certainly, or fire support coordination lines beyond which you know that things are in opposition to yourself. But if the infrastructure in those areas that you're taking down supports non-governmental organizations and hospitals, etc., then you can certainly see how the companies that would be involved in defending those institutions are going to do their best to keep all of that working. And they should do. And therefore you see entities, actually like the president of Microsoft, developing a community of industry leaders to support the concept of a cyber Geneva Convention. And so there is a large impact from the strategic level to the tactical level and back up again in the way that industry is involved in conflict itself. So I'll leave it at that.
And we're going to come back to the conversation about how to enhance cooperation between industry and government. But first, let me just have a quick question or a quick comment about the fact that we've been talking a lot about Eastern Europe and the Indo-Pacific. And one of the things that we sometimes don't talk enough about in the Canadian context and in the North American context is a threat emanating from the Latin America and Caribbean region. So we have Cristiano here today from the Brazilian Army, and he's also works out of the Inter-America Defense Board out of Washington. So thank you very much for being here today. And just tell us what you see the threat emanating and the threat that you're dealing with from a Latin America, Caribbean perspective, as we know the threat is omnipresent there as well.
Okay, thank you, Dan. By what I follow on the press, I think that when you think about the threats concerning Latin America, we usually don't think about cyber threats. We have other concerns there, but if you take a closer look at each country, you will see that threats are there, and some of them are very peculiar. So, at first, I would mention the question of cybercrime. We have a huge threat concerning cybercrime to the point, for example, at the banking system, the internet banking system in South America face a very hostile landscape. We have a recent case of, for example, of malware targeting banking system operating in Europe or North America, and the source of the malware came from South America, because the criminal groups there are very advanced to the point of exporting their technology. So also we have the question of huge disparity in the maturity levels for each country. We have countries that already have policies, regulatory frameworks to address that, policy force addressing the question of cybercrime, but other countries are at a very basic level. So we have to address also this very huge disparity for every country. Also, related to this, we still have countries that rely on, like we say, security by obscurity. For example, our infrastructure sector, our critical sector for a country, they're relying, okay, nobody wants to attack this. But this, like we say, obscurity is not effective for a motivated attacker at all. And now, even more, we have motivated attackers for different reasons. For the people coming from the attacker groups targeting financial sector, banking, but we also have cases of foreigner groups related or not to states, to state actors. As we know, attribution is not perfect. Attribution is also very difficult, but we also have this kind of activity there. We have groups that gained foothold inside key sectors like telecommunications, banking, sometimes to financial gains, sometimes to intelligence gains, and related to the disparity in maturity levels, we have countries completely unaware of this activity. So, just as a closure, this is one of the main focus we have in the IDB, in the Inter-American Defense Board, to try to reduce the gap we have between the countries, and because we know if your neighbor is in a very bad situation, there is a trend that will sooner or later to affect you also. So I think that's the main points I would like to give you. Thank you.
Thank you. Look, it's clear in the conversations that we've had so far that the real strength in our abilities to deal with the cyber threat is really working with allies and partners. So I'd like to ask both General Eyre and General Yarker, one to give the view from a strategic perspective and the other one from an operational perspective, the criticality of allies and partners in this fight.
You know, much like working with allies anywhere, we're stronger with allies than without. And as we do missions together, we learn from each other, but moreover, we learn the threats that each other are facing and how to deal with those. Now, Canada's got a very strong reputation of capacity building with other militaries around the world. And as we have moved into the cyber capacity building realm, this has actually gained us a significant amount of trust based on the approach, based on the teamwork, and it's led to what one could call cyber diplomacy because of that trust that extends itself into other realms. And so continuing with those cyber capacity building missions within capacity, within the size of the force we've got available, absolutely essential, and is a new way of building partnerships that we see a tremendous amount of value in.
Okay, I'll hit just a couple of things. One on why and then a little bit on how. So the very first conference that I went to as a newly minted cyber expert in the Canadian Armed Forces, which meant I'd been posted into a job that didn't even have cyber in the title at the time. One of the keynote speakers was General Alexander, who had not even yet stood up Cyber Command. And he said that one of the things you really needed to understand about cyber as a domain is that cyber was a team sport, And more than a team sport, it was a team sport with no bench limit. Unlike many other sports, you can bring everyone to the field who is willing to play on your team, and therefore, the more, the better. Like, this should be relatively familiar to us as cyber people. Cyber partnerships gain from the network effect. Adding one more partner is not just one more partner, it's another piece of a web of partnerships that can work together and be very strong. So let's come to some of the concrete things that Canada gets out of its partnerships with others. It's interesting. I've had this conversation now twice already today. There's a lot of things we gain. First of all, one of the things that we do with partners is threat hunting. For those familiar with that, great. For those not, that's where we go onto a network, search out particular adversaries we want to find, and kick them off the network. One of the things about hunting is that you don't hunt for deer in shopping malls. You want to go to where the deer are. Partners that we build deep relationships with end up with networks that, for a variety of reasons, are more thoroughly penetrated by the adversaries that we want to learn about. Which brings me to the second part of the conversation, which is we get to learn about them. We get to learn about those adversaries with our partners at the same time, and that information tends to end up back in the global set of known indicators of compromise and other sorts of databases that define what bad looks like in society. So there's a wide range of reasons why we do international partnerships, but they have been enormously impactful on how we've been able to conduct our activities.
Thanks, sir. Let's just transition now to the need. We talked a little bit about where we're going to fight on infrastructure that's owned by private industry. One of the challenges we've had is how do we bring private industry, academia, government together and work closer? So, Derek, over to you. What is your recommendation as a person who's worn a uniform, as well as now for some time been in private industry? How do we work together better?
I think thanks very much. And it's really interesting to delve into the word partnership, as General Yarko was just mentioning there. So partners, we're used to the partnership in terms of our allies and other nations, etc., that we're going to fight with. We're used to vendor and supplier relationships with industry. And even when we say that we're doing partnership, it's just a better way to manage the contract, really. This is not the same thing in the cyber and the digital world. What goes well in that world is the fact that we already see absolute integration of capabilities between the technology companies and the governments, and by extension the armed forces, whereby they share a huge amount of threat intelligence. Certainly the hyperscalers do. The hyperscalers are monitoring trillions of security signals a day, much more than any government or public sector entity could possibly manage. They are defending against billions of nation-state sponsored attacks per minute at a level, again, that governments can't necessarily feel that level of capability. They take down thousands of malicious domain sites. They take civil actions to seize the assets of criminals who are sponsored by other nations. That's fantastic. And yet that scale is probably not enough in its own right, because you have to look farther than that. When it comes to warfighting itself, we traditionally look at combat power in a very traditional sense in terms of the physical, conceptual, and moral components of combat power. Physical piece is what you actually have to do to fight. The conceptual piece is understanding how to fight, and then the moral piece is the ethical piece, the will to fight, which is tied to how you feel about it and how your ethics work. I just say that piece in its own right needs to be treated with care as you go forward, because the vast majority of your combat power is going to be provided by those who can put in investments at clip levels of $100 billion at a time and above, and that's industry. That's fine. The conceptual component, the engineering understanding of where the technology is going next, again, will largely lie in the industry, and you need to understand how you're going to talk about the defense needs to those industry companies. The moral component is where it becomes tricky too, and where absolutely close partnership is essential. Because the companies themselves will always do the right thing. Well, they will always obey the law, certainly, because that's in their commercial interest. But their interests go beyond the commercial into the ethical requirements to support their workforce. beyond the nation-state requirement, as witnessed by hyperscaler support to Project Maven for targeting purposes and for intelligence, etc. And I know Google had a problem with that. And as we've recently seen about hyperscaler support for SIGINT use in the dreadful circumstances of Gaza, action by the members of those companies can change the company policy and what it will do. And if your mission profile is dependent upon that technology, you better understand where you're going next, which means simply that you must have a very close relationship and partnership, not simply a vendor relationship with your supplier.
Thanks, Derek. Gunther, how have you overcome this obstacle, or how have you dealt with this challenge of integration of private and public?
Because I wanted to intervene with Derek's contribution, but okay, it's a lead-weighted question. So, two things. First, availability of technology, which you need to perform your mission. So we have a public-private partnership, which is called CyberMate in Belgium for Defense. Through this partnership, we have a strategy in place to allow, to sponsor a development of certain technologies, which will allow us to achieve sovereignty on national or EU level, so that we have the technology available and in scale when needed. Also, we're using this public-private partnership to give guidance to the educational branch of the government, so that the industry is telling the schools what kind of skills they need. So that's two ways for technology and education skill sets. Also, the other one is what we do is that we identified, in order to be successful in our missions, we need military vital infrastructure, which is in part critical infrastructure, but not all of them, and which is also supply chain, but not all of them. So what we do, and we are going for the second iteration in January next year, is we pick out certain companies to do a tabletop exercise. And we start from the point that everything has been put in place. So you have your frameworks, your cybersecurity, or your business continuity plan, everything is put in place. And then we start the exercise in such a way that we are trying to explain to the companies the interdependencies amongst them. Because the decision of one can have a direct or indirect influence on the availability of certain services to the other one. And so we did this for military mobility, which was a great success, was in the beginning of this year. And January next year, we'll do one for the maritime sector, focused on energy. So that's two of the things we do.
Outstanding. Ladies and gentlemen, I think that concludes our time here on this great panel today. I would ask that if you do have any questions, please do not hesitate to come and see us. We'll be off on the right-hand flank, or my right-hand flank here, your left-hand side. Please come up and ask us any questions. And also, I would remind you that some of the things that we talked about today, you're going to hear more about a little bit later on. There's going to be a panel on cyber diplomacy. There's going to be a panel on cybersecurity cooperation and capacity building. And some of the things that we touched on are going to be going a little bit in depth later on this afternoon. Well, thank you very much for your attention.
And we do have 5 minutes to have some questions here with everybody. Donc, on a toujours un petit 5 minutes si vous avez des questions que vous aurez poser directement au micro. Donc, don't be shy. Est-ce qu'il y a quelqu'un qui aimerait poser des questions à notre panel ici? Alors, first question.
Hi, can you hear me? Hi. Yeah, well, two questions actually. My first question, what's being done in Canadian Armed Forces to recruit, train, and especially to retain the cyber specialists, because it's quite a steep knowledge gap. And my second question would be how reserve units are incorporated in Cyber Command. Thank you.
Are you looking for a job?
Sorry.
Well, actually, I'm already employed, but certainly.
And there's a booth just at the back there. Hey, listen, we could talk for an hour or an hour and a half to answer those questions in depth. So I encourage you, just come up and buttonhole me at the end. But at the very high level, we have dedicated trade structures for cyber operators. We have training paths in place. The answer to retention, our number one tool for retention is mission. And that is cyber operators today stay because the work that they're doing is interesting and compelling, and it has a direct impact on the defense of Canada.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Bonjour. Hi. It's a question for Gunther in particular, but also we're currently dealing with the Canadian Armed Forces. And our solution is a really DCS, zero trust approach to the business. We've been talking with some of the engineers in NATO too. And just want to have a chance to be able to talk to your perspective in terms of Belgium, European Union, and everything else in that context. DCS is a big thing that we're pushing for with the Canadian Armed Forces, and there's definitely an interest in that. So I just want to see if there's a chance we can actually connect with you guys also.
Yeah, afterwards, I'll be there. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Last consideration? Dernière intervention?
Thank you. I used to work offensive operations at US NSA about 25 years ago, and some of my most delightful operations were with the Canadians. So
Come a little bit closer to the mic.
I don't do mics very well. My question: it seemed like there was a common theme that offensive tools and people are hard to find. I just find that curious because coming from an American perspective, also owning a company that sells offensive technology, I feel like there's a glut of tools and training, and sifting through that is actually the harder problem than finding it in the first place. I don't know if anyone wanted to comment on that.
I'll give a first answer to your question. We do not communicate about our offensive capabilities.
Okay, maybe I could be just slightly more forthcoming. Listen, the way that we train and build capacity is such that the availability of the people to do this work is never what we would like it to be. The requirements that we have to put those folks, in my case, in uniform, certainly discourages some from continuing along that path. But I would say that I don't have a unique set of problems on the offensive side. So if I communicated that, it may have been inappropriately.
Perhaps because I'm not in uniform, I can make one small piece. NATO is actually fairly transparent about how it sources offensive capabilities in the cyberspace, in that nations deliver voluntarily a capability to them, which can be integrated down to the tactical level. But it does obviously, if it comes from a nation state, it comes also with the caveats and the rules and the policies of that nation. And that makes integration at the lower levels as difficult as it is with kinetic forces, to be perfectly honest. But the tool sets that can be provided by any single nation can be done voluntarily as they go forward, and they are commercially available, so you're aware of them.
Thank you for this. If you're really, really quick, I do have time for the two last questions.
Right. This is a question mainly for General Air and Colonel Blanc. General Yarker, if you're able to comment, that's great, but maybe you're not allowed to comment on policy. Do you think Canadian defense is hampered by the fact that we don't have a foreign and offensive intelligence service, a civilian counterpart that you could relate to compared to our other counterparts and allies?
Interesting.
Hey, yeah, look, I make no excuse here. I've been a full proponent of the fact that Canada needs a foreign intelligence collection agency on the human side of things, a Canadian MI6 or whatever that version is going to look like. At the end of the day, UMINT needs to be a sovereign effort and collection effort to answer answer questions from a Canadian perspective. We should rely on human intelligence from other nations, which is what we're doing a lot in the current environment. So my view is we should have this capability integral to Canada.
I agree completely.
That was quick.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you. And last question.
Question for our Brazilian colleague. Fairly comfortable with how the West, Canada, Europe handle integration between governments and militaries. Can you expand a little bit on how that's viewed in South America?
Let me check if I got a question. A little bit.
sorry, the question is.
Yes,
I'm sorry.
I got it. Thank you. So, like I said, we don't have a common answer for every country because we don't have a organization like NATO, like Belgium makes part. So we can take an example from my case from Brazil. We still have this question separating cyber defense and cyber security when you talk about national security. But there, for example, you have the militaries responsible for keeping the defense systems, and you have other agencies responsible for the national security concerning critical infrastructure or key sectors. But the Brazilian case, we have other countries treating this, but we don't have a uniform answer for your question, sadly. We're trying right now to, for example, we have a seminar in the IDB to try to share success case between countries, because right now we still have countries developing their policies, their national white books, like we say, to say the top level frameworks or regulatory documents to address this question. But we have some countries are more advanced. Maybe the countries from North America, like our general told us, they are doing very well in this area. The same for the U.S. But to the south, we still have some big countries like Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, Chile. They are more advanced. So what we are trying to do right now is to share the success case and to bring the door in a less developed state to our high state. Okay.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, c'est ce qui met fait à ce panel bien attendu sur la cybercriminalité. Merci beaucoup à M. Daniel Blanc, le major général Davy Archer, le général à la retraite Wayne Eyre, le colonel Gunter Godefroy, Derek Dodson et Cristiano Pereira. Si on peut les applaudir, un grand merci, messieurs.